Her eyes, usually soft as dusk, were now hard as polished stone. She wasn't asking for my help anymore. She was telling me what was going to happen. My truck, my home, was part of the price. My name wasn't on the bill, but I was expected to pay. The Arizona night air is a different kind of animal. It ain't like the thick, humid blanket you get down in Louisiana that feels like you're breathing water, or the crisp, pine-scented chill of the high Rockies that cleans you out from the inside. Out on this stretch of Route 66, somewhere between Kingman and nowhere, the air is thin and dry, and it tastes like dust and distance. It carries the scent of creosote bush after a phantom rain that never fell and the low, electric hum of a million stars you can't see from any city. It's an honest air. It doesn't hide anything. That should have been my first clue. I'd rolled my Freightliner Cascadia into the gravel lot of the Flicker and Fade just after 10 p.m. It was a habit, a bad one maybe, but one I'd fallen into over the last year. A ritual on my westbound haul. The bar was a squat, cinder block building that looked like it had been dropped from a great height and just left there, too tired to bounce. Its neon sign, a martini glass with a flickering olive, was the only color for 50 miles in any direction. The flicker part was accurate, the fade was a promise. Or maybe a warning. I never could decide which. I killed the engine but left the battery on, letting the amber glow of the dash lights paint the inside of my cab. This was my space. My confessional, my dining room, my bedroom. 2 million miles I'd pushed this country back and forth, and this 10-foot box behind my driver's seat was the only real estate I truly owned. It smelled of gas station coffee, worn leather, the faint, clean scent of the Windex I used on the inside of the windshield, and something else, the metallic tang of loneliness. You can scrub and air out the cab all you want, but that smell never really leaves. It gets into the upholstery, into the very steel of the frame. It's the ghost of every mile driven alone. Most truckers avoided this place. The lot was too small for a full-sized rig, the turnaround was tight, and the owner, a guy named Carl, was known to be a surly drunk who looked at every customer like they were personally responsible for his life's disappointments. But I wasn't here for the parking or the company. I wasn't even here for a drink. I was here for Lena. I watched the front door of the bar through my side mirror. Inside, shadows moved against the grimy windows, distorted and slow, like fish in a murky tank. Carl would be in his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing a bourbon and staring into the dregs of whatever dream he'd once had. He owned the place, but he was its most loyal and miserable customer, a king ruling over an empire of sticky tables and regret. I'd seen it 100 times in 100 roadside dives. Men who build a place to trap themselves in. A few minutes passed. The reefer unit on the trailer behind me kicked on with a low, familiar growl, a mechanical heartbeat in the silence of the desert. It was hauling a load of California strawberries this time, bound for Chicago. A fragile cargo. A sweet cargo. It felt like a joke, sitting here in this bitter place, hauling sweetness across a landscape of thorns. Then, the side door of the bar creaked open. It was a door for taking out the trash, but it was her door. Lena. She slipped out into the darkness, a silhouette against the weak yellow light spilling from the doorway. She moved with a quiet urgency I'd come to recognize, glancing back once before pulling the door shut with a soft click that I felt more than heard. She wasn't wearing her apron. Just jeans and a thin blouse that the slight breeze pressed against her, outlining a frame that seemed too delicate for this harsh landscape. She hugged her arms to her chest as she walked across the gravel, her boots crunching a rhythm that my own heart seemed to pick up, a nervous, syncopated beat. I leaned over and pushed the passenger door open. The cab light came on, a sudden, harsh intrusion, and I winced, killing it with the overhead switch. I preferred the dark. The dark was safer. The dark was our medium. She climbed the steps without a word and slid into the seat, pulling the door shut behind her. The cab was instantly smaller, warmer. She smelled of the bar, stale beer and fried onions, but underneath it, she smelled of herself, a scent like clean cotton and desert sage and something uniquely her, something that always made the cab feel a little less empty. She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders slumping as if they'd been holding up a great weight that she could finally set down, just for a moment. "Hey, Sam." "Lena," I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. It always was, after a long stretch of silence on the road. It takes a while to find the right gear for talking to a person instead of a CB radio. She didn't look at me right away. She just stared out the windshield at the endless dark ribbon of the highway, a river of asphalt flowing into nothing. Her hair was the color of dark honey, pulled back in a loose ponytail, but strands had escaped and framed a face that was pretty in a tired way. There were fine lines around her eyes that weren't from smiling. They were from squinting into a future she didn't want to see. "He's on a roll tonight," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Telling the same three guys the same story about the time he almost bought a fishing boat in San Diego. "He won't even know I'm gone." That was the arrangement. The unspoken agreement. I'd pull in on my westbound run, park in the back corner of the lot where my rig was just a big shadow among other shadows. I'd wait. And she'd slip out for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, and we'd sit here in the quiet dark of my truck and pretend the world wasn't what it was. We'd build a little island of time in the middle of a sea of misery. We didn't do much. Mostly we talked. She'd tell me about her day, about the leaky faucet in the ladies' room, about the food supplier who was always trying to short her on the frozen fries, about a tourist who'd mistaken a Gila monster for a lost pet. I'd tell her about the road. About the sunrise over the salt flats in Utah that made the world look like a fresh sheet of paper, or the traffic jam outside of Barstow that stretched for 10 miles under a merciless sun, or the way the fog rolls in over the Golden Gate Bridge and swallows it whole, leaving you to drive on faith. It was an escape for both of us. For her, it was a break from the noise and the smell and the slow-motion collapse of her husband. For me, it was a break from the loneliness. The road is a damn lonely place. You're surrounded by people, by cars and trucks and lives moving at 70 miles an hour, but you're sealed in your own bubble of glass and steel. Lena, for half an hour every other week, she'd pop that bubble. She'd let a little bit of the world in, or let a little bit of me out. I was never sure which. Tonight was different, though. I could feel it the moment she got in. The usual weariness in her was coiled into a tight, nervous spring. She kept wringing her hands in her lap, her knuckles white in the dim glow from the dash. Her silence wasn't the comfortable kind we usually shared, it was a heavy, charged thing, full of unspoken words. "You okay?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. In this life, you learn to read the weather in people's faces. And a storm was brewing in hers. She shook her head, a small, jerky motion. "No. Not really." She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were wide and dark, and I could see the reflection of my dash lights in them like tiny, trapped stars. "I think I have to leave him, Sam." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than a full load of steel. It was the thing we never said. The third rail. We both knew her marriage was a wreck. I'd seen Carl in action a few times when I'd gone in for a coffee to go. A big man, gone soft in the middle, with a mean drunk glint in his eye and a way of talking to Lena like she was a piece of equipment he owned that wasn't working right. He'd bark her name from across the room if his glass was empty, never a please or a thank you. I'd seen him grab her arm once, a little too hard. When she was slow with his change. The memory made my hand clench on the gearshift. But saying it out loud, that changed the game. It made it real. It took it from being a sad story and turned it into a problem that needed a solution. "Leave him and go where?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. It was the practical question. The trucker question. You don't start a trip without knowing the destination. Hope is not a town on any map I've ever seen. "I don't know," she whispered, and her voice broke on the last word. A tear traced a path through the faint layer of dust on her cheek, a tiny, clean river through a dry land. "Anywhere. I've been saving a little cash. Hiding it in a coffee can in the pantry. Not much, but enough for a bus ticket. Enough to get a room for a week or two until I can find a job." My first instinct, the one that comes from a deep, stupid place in a man's heart, was to say, "Come with me." The words were right there on my tongue, hot and ready. I could see it. Her, in this passenger seat, for good. Waking up to the sunrise in Wyoming. Seeing the fall colors in Vermont. We could just go. Leave the flicker and fade in Carl and the whole damn mess in the rearview mirror until it was just another speck of dust. But I'm 42 years old. I've been divorced. I've had my heart ripped out and run over by a semi, metaphorically speaking, more than once. I know that just go is a fantasy you have when you're 20. When you're my age, you know that everyone's dragging a trailer full of their own baggage, and hooking it up to yours just makes for a heavier load, a slower climb up the mountain passes. It's not just him, she said, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Things are bad, Sam. Worse than I said. The air in the cab got thicker, heavier. This was new territory. Our time was supposed to be a refuge from the bad things, not a place to bring them. How bad? I asked, my voice low. She hesitated, looking out the window at the dark shape of the bar. I could see the silhouette of Carl moving inside, stumbling as he made his way back to his stool. He owes people money, she said, her voice dropping even lower. A lot of money. Not to a bank. My hand tightened on the steering wheel. I'd been around. I knew what not to a bank meant. It meant guys who don't use credit scores and repayment plans. They send you letters written in bruises and broken bones. It explained the new level of fear in her, a raw, primal terror that went beyond a bad marriage. This wasn't just about a drunk husband anymore. This was about survival. The words brought back a ghost I hadn't thought of in a while, Mac Riley. He was an old-timer, drove for the same company as me for a few years. A good man, mostly, with a laugh that could fill a truck stop diner and a weakness for the poker machines you find in the back rooms of places just like this. We ran the I-80 corridor together a few times, up through Wyoming and Nebraska. He always talked about the one big score that would let him hang up his keys and buy a little bait shop on a lake in Minnesota. One night, over coffee in Cheyenne, he told me he was down. Bad. He'd gotten a marker from some private casino in Reno, and the interest was piling up faster than the miles. He looked haunted. They find you, Sammy, he'd said, stirring his coffee so hard it sloshed over the rim. These guys, they don't care if you're in Omaha or Timbuktu. They got long arms. 2 months later, his rig was found abandoned on the shoulder outside Elko, Nevada. Engine was cold, keys in the ignition, his logbook open on the seat. A half-eaten sandwich on the dash. Mac was just gone. Vanished. Cops said he probably just walked away, started a new life. But us drivers, we knew. The long arms had found him. Mac became a ghost story we told new drivers, a warning about the darkness that waits just off the interstate. Who? I asked Lena, the one-word question heavy as lead, Mac's haunted face swimming in my memory. Some guys from Vegas. He got into a game, a private one, up in a hotel suite. Thought he was a big shot, that he could swim with the sharks. He's been chasing his losses for a year. Throwing good money after bad. He put the bar up as collateral, but it's not enough. They were here last week. She shuddered, a full-body tremor that shook the seat. They weren't nice, Sam. They sat right where we are, in a car just like this, and waited for me to get off my shift. They told me what happens to men who don't pay. And what happens to their wives. I felt a cold anger settle in my gut. Anger at Carl for being such a damn fool, for dragging her into his mess. Anger at the faceless Vegas guys for preying on broken men. And a protective feeling for Lena that was dangerous and stupid and completely unavoidable. I've got a scar under my jaw from a bar in Laredo, Texas, a jagged white line hidden by a day's worth of stubble. It's a permanent reminder of what can happen when you stick your nose into business that isn't yours. It was a fight over a waitress who was being hassled by her ex. I thought I was being a hero, stepping in. I ended up with 15 stitches and a lesson about how some situations are a tangled mess of history you can't see. The guy wasn't just an ex, he was the brother of the bar owner, and the whole place turned on me. I got my ass kicked and banned for life. But as the cops were putting me in the back of their car, the waitress, she looked at me with a kind of gratitude I hadn't seen before. A look that said, "Thank you for seeing me." Sometimes, you take the punch just to see that look. What do they want? I asked Lena, my voice grim. Money, she said, with a bitter little laugh that held no humor. What else? $50,000. Money we don't have. Money we'll never have. He's been drinking more, trying to forget. But I can't. I'm the one who has to talk to them when they call. I'm the one who has to smile and tell the customers everything's fine when I feel like our whole world is about to burn to the ground. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. The moonlight caught the curve of her throat, the frantic pulse beating there. She looked fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. "I just want to be gone," she whispered. "I want to wake up one morning and not have this knot in my stomach. I want to be somewhere no one knows my name, somewhere I can just be a person again, not this." And there it was again. The open door. The invitation. This time it felt different. This wasn't just a sad woman in a bad marriage. This was a woman in danger. The equation had changed. My carefully constructed wall of detachment, built from the bricks of past heartaches and hard-learned lessons, was starting to crumble. It reminded me of Clara. The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and unwelcome like a shard of glass in your tire. Clara was the woman from Montana. The one whose picture, faded and folded into a perfect square, was still tucked in the sun visor above my head. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I knew every line of her face, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she really smiled, the little scar above her eyebrow from falling off a horse as a kid. It was almost 20 years ago. I was just a kid myself, really, barely 23, running a dedicated route up to Billings with a flatbed hauling construction materials. She worked at a ranch supply store where I'd sometimes pick up freight bales of wire, pallets of feed. She was different from the other girls. She read books, real books with no pictures, and she had this way of looking at you like she was seeing right through the grease and the road dust to the person underneath. She didn't talk much, but when she did, her words had weight. Her family owned a huge spread of land up in the Paradise Valley, a place so beautiful it hurt to look at, with the Yellowstone River cutting through it and the Absaroka Mountains standing guard. But to her, it was a cage made of mountains. She felt trapped by the endless sky, by the legacy, by her father's ironclad expectations. He was a hard man, carved out of the same rock as the mountains, who saw the world in terms of acreage and bloodlines. He had her life mapped out, and it didn't include a long-haul trucker with Oklahoma plates. We had a thing. It was fast and intense. The way things are when you're young and the clock is always ticking down to your next departure. My truck was our world. We wouldn't go to bars or movies. I'd pick her up after her shift, and we'd drive up these winding dirt roads to scenic overlooks, the whole valley spread out below us like a blanket woven by God. And she'd talk about seeing the ocean. She'd never seen the ocean. She'd say the word like it was a prayer, Pacific. She'd read about it in her books, how it just went on forever, how it tasted of salt. To her, it was the opposite of the mountains that held her in. One night, under a moon so bright it bleached the color out of the pines and made the snow on the peaks glow, I told her to come with me. I meant it with all the dumb, honest conviction of a 23-year-old who thought love could conquer anything, even geography. "Just pack a bag," I'd said, my voice shaking a little. "We'll be in California in 2 days. You can put your feet in the Pacific. I swear it." I can still see her face in the moonlight filtering through the windshield. The hope warring with the fear. It was a terrible, beautiful thing to watch. She looked at my truck, at the open road stretching out into the darkness, and then back towards the valley where her whole life, her family, her history, her prison was. In the end, she couldn't do it. The fear won. The weight of all that land, all that history, was too much. She chose the cage she knew over the freedom she didn't. "I can't, Sam," she'd whispered, and the words shattered something inside me that has never quite set right since. It's all I've ever known. My dad, he'd never forgive me. And my mom, she needs me. She kissed me goodbye, and I remember the salt of her tears on my lips. It was a taste of defeat. I drove away and never took that route again. I called my dispatcher the next day and told them to find someone else for the Billings run. I heard from another driver a year later that she'd married a local rancher, a guy her father approved of. I wondered if he ever took her to see the ocean. I bet he didn't. Losing Clara taught me a hard lesson: you can offer someone a ride, but you can't make them take it. And you can't save someone who isn't ready to save themselves. Or worse, someone who doesn't want to be saved by you. So I bit back the words. "Come with me." But then, looking at Lena's face, I didn't see Clara's fear of the unknown. I saw something much more immediate. The terror of the known. The known was 2 men in a car who threatened her. The known was a husband who was a sinking ship, pulling her down with him. This wasn't a choice between a cage and freedom. This was a choice between drowning and a life raft. Even if that life raft was me. And that's when another ghost climbed into the cab. My brother, Danny. I don't talk about my brother. I barely even let myself think about him. But when things get messy, when there's a hint of real danger and desperation, his ghost always shows up, sitting in the passenger seat where Lena was now. He was 2 years younger, brighter, quicker with a smile. Where I was steady as a rock, he was a firework, all flash and bang and unpredictable trajectory. He got into trouble the way other people get into a warm bed easily and often. And it finally caught up with him. The last time I saw him was in a grimy apartment in Tulsa that smelled of stale cigarettes, cheap weed, and desperation. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I just finished a run and was on my 34-hour reset. He called me, his voice tightened fast. He'd lost his job framing houses, was mixed up with some bad people over a debt, the same old story. He had that same look in his eyes I was seeing in Lena's, that cornered animal desperation. "Sammy, I messed up," he'd said, pacing the small room, kicking at a pile of dirty clothes. "Real bad this time." He asked me for help. $4,000-5,000. For a ride out of town, a clean start. He said he just needed to get to Colorado, where a buddy had a job for him. And I said no. I was tired of his messes. I'd bailed him out a dozen times before. I was 31, just starting to get my life together after my divorce, and I was done being his safety net. I gave him a lecture instead of the money. I told him to grow up, to face his problems like a man. My exact words were, "I'm not your ATM, Danny. You gotta stand on your own 2 feet." I was tough. I was responsible. I was a damn fool. We argued. He called me a self-righteous bastard who forgot where he came from. I told him he was a screw-up who was going to end up dead or in jail. I slammed the door on my way out. A week later, my mom called, her voice a sound I will never forget, a shattered thing. Danny was gone. No note, no body, just gone. His car was found parked by the Arkansas River. The people he owed money to said they didn't know anything. No one ever knew anything. And every mile I've driven since, I've carried the weight of that no. The guilt is a passenger that never gets out. You gotta stand on your own 2 feet, I'd said. Maybe he tried, right there at the edge of the river. Looking at Lena, seeing her desperation, hearing the threat in her voice. I couldn't say no again. I couldn't drive away and wonder for the rest of my life what happened to her. I couldn't have another ghost in my cab. "I'm deadheading to LA after I drop this load in Flagstaff," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them, tasting of penance. "The trailer'll be empty. I'm taking 2 days off there before I pick up my next run." You could ride that far. Get a fresh start." Her eyes snapped open. The hope in them was so bright it was painful to look at. It was the same look Clara had given me, but this time, I wasn't going to let it be for nothing. This time, she would get in the truck. "You mean it?" she breathed, her voice trembling. I nodded, my stomach twisting into a knot of fear and resolve. "Yeah. I mean it. If you're serious. If you're really ready to walk away." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, and in her gaze, I saw a dozen different emotions play out. Hope, fear, gratitude, and something else, something I couldn't quite read. A frantic intensity that looked like determination. I told myself it was the look of a survivor. "When?" she asked, her voice firm now. "I'll be back through in 2 days. Thursday night. Same time." The words sealed the deal. I'd made the offer. I'd laid the route out on the map. 2 days, she repeated, like she was memorizing a lifeline. Okay. Okay, Sam. I'll be ready. I'll just have a small bag." She leaned over, and before I knew what was happening, she kissed me. It wasn't like the other times, the few chaste, hurried pecks we'd shared in the dark. This was different. It was desperate and deep and full of a terrifying promise. It tasted of salt and cheap whiskey from her husband's breath, a ghost between us, but underneath it was the taste of her relief. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. The 2 simplest words in the language, but they hit me with the force of a physical blow. A down payment on my redemption. She got out of the truck as quickly as she'd gotten in, scurrying back across the gravel and slipping through the side door of the bar without a sound, a ghost returning to her haunting. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, the engine off, the only sound the hum of the reefer and the blood pounding in my ears. I had just offered to help a woman run away from her husband and his Vegas loan sharks. I had just invited a hurricane into the carefully ordered quiet of my life. I had just decided to answer for what I'd done to Danny by saving Lena. I looked up at the sun visor. I didn't pull the picture down, but I thought about Clara. I thought about how I'd felt driving away from her, that mix of regret and relief. This time felt different. This time, it wasn't just about a broken heart. This felt like it could get somebody killed. I finally started the engine. The roar of the Detroit diesel was a comforting, familiar sound. As I pulled out of the lot, the headlight swept across the front of the bar. For a second, I saw a face in the window. It wasn't Carl's. It was Lena. She was standing there, watching me go. And the expression on her face wasn't relief. It was something else entirely. Something colder, more focused. But I told myself I was just seeing things. It was the glare on the glass, the tricks the night plays on a tired man's eyes. I put the hammer down and pointed my rig west, toward the lights of Flagstaff, trying to outrun the feeling that I hadn't just offered someone a ride. I had just agreed to be the getaway driver. The next 2 days were a blur of asphalt and caffeine. I dropped my load of strawberries in Flagstaff, got my papers signed, and turned right back around, deadheading east. The empty trailer felt wrong, like a lie. A deadhead run always feels a little like you're a ghost on the highway, all noise and no purpose, your trailer echoing with every bump in the road. This time, it felt like I was driving a hearse in reverse, going to pick up a life instead of delivering a coffin. My mind was a hornet's nest. 1 minute, I was planning it out, a meticulous, professional route. I'd pick her up, we'd drive through the night. No stops until we were past the California state line. I'd give her the cash I had stashed in the cab, about $800, my emergency fund. I'd drop her at a clean, anonymous motel in a suburb of LA, a place with a pool and free breakfast, and wish her luck. A clean break. A good deed. My conscience finally clear about Danny. The next minute, I was thinking about Carl. And the Vegas guys. What happens when they find her gone? They're not going to just write off 50 grand. They'll look for her. And who's the first person they're gonna look at? The trucker who made a habit of stopping at their bar. They might not know my name, but they can get a license plate. They can find me. My whole life is on file with the DOT. Samuel McCarty. Born in Oklahoma, 1983. Current address, the cab of a Freightliner Cascadia. Not a hard man to track down when you have the right motivation. I imagined a dark sedan pulling alongside me on a lonely stretch of I-40, a window rolling down. I drove a little faster. I kept seeing headlights in my rearview mirror at night, a single pair that seemed to hang back for miles, matching my speed. My heart would start pounding. I'd change lanes, slow down, and they'd eventually pass, just a regular four-wheeler, some family heading to the Grand Canyon. But the paranoia lingered, a bitter taste in the back of my throat. Every shadow on the road looked menacing, every flicker of light a threat. I was driving through a landscape I knew like the back of my hand, but it had all become hostile territory. I pulled into a rest stop outside Williams, the gateway to the Grand Canyon. The air was cold, and the sky was a deep, star-filled purple. I needed coffee. The bad, burnt kind that's been sitting on a hot plate for 12 hours. The only kind that works. As I was walking toward the little vending machine building, a highway patrol car pulled in and parked a few spots down from my rig. The officer got out, a young guy, looked like he was barely old enough to shave, but he had that cop walk, slow and deliberate. He nodded at me as I passed. "Evenin'," I said, my voice steady. "How's the road tonight?" he asked, his eyes scanning my truck, the empty lot. "Clear and quiet," I replied. "Keep it that way," he said with a tired smile, and went inside. For a long, crazy minute, I stood there under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the walkway, thinking. I could just tell him. Walk up to his car, tap on the window, and tell him everything. "There's a woman in a bar down the road, she's in trouble, her husband owes money to some bad people from Vegas, they've threatened her. Let the law handle it. That's what they're for. But what would I say? My secret girlfriend that I meet in my truck while her husband's inside getting drunk needs help? They'd look at me like I was the problem. They'd drive down to the flicker and fade, talk to her. She'd get scared, deny everything to protect Carl, and I'd be the crazy, obsessive trucker who caused a problem. And Carl's buddies from Vegas, they don't like cops. Bringing them into it would be like throwing a match in a room full of dynamite. It could get her hurt worse. Cops have procedures. Guys like that have methods. And their methods are always faster. No. The law wasn't the answer. This was my mess now. Mine and Lena's. A debt I had to pay. I got my coffee, black and bitter, and went back to my truck. I sat there, watching the other rigs pull in and out. Families in minivans, kids asleep in the back. A couple of bikers on Harleys, their leather creaking as they stretched. Each one a little story rolling down the highway. And here I was, about to write a new, dangerous chapter in my own, using someone else's ink. I drove the rest of the way to the flicker and fade in a state of grim resolve. This was happening. I was going to do this one good thing. I was going to give her the ride Clara never took. I was going to be the guy who showed up. For Danny. For her. For me. I pulled into the lot just before 10 p.m. on Thursday, same as I'd promised. The neon sign was doing its stuttering dance, casting a sickly green and red glow on the gravel. The lot was emptier than usual. Just two dusty pickup trucks that looked like they hadn't moved in a week, and a dark, late-model sedan I didn't recognize. A Buick or a Lincoln, something clean and anonymous. It was parked near the front door, not in a marked spot, just sitting there. Like a spider waiting. I backed my rig into my usual spot in the far corner, killing the lights but leaving the engine running this time. A low, steady rumble. Ready to go. My go bag was on the passenger seat, a small duffel with a change of clothes, a toothbrush, and the $800 in cash. I'd give it to her, the whole thing. A down payment on a new life. My eyes were glued to that sedan. No one got out. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. My gut went cold. These were them. The Vegas guys. They were here. On the night she was supposed to leave. My plan had been to wait for Lena to come to me. But the sedan changed everything. Was she okay? Did they know? Was this a trap? My mind raced through a dozen terrible scenarios. My hand hovered over the key. I could leave. Right now. Just put the truck in gear and be a mile down the road before anyone knew I was even here. Fade back into the night. No one would blame me. It was the smart play. The sane play. The self-preservation I should have practiced years ago. But I thought of her face. The hope in her eyes. Thank you, she'd said. I'd made a promise. My dad, a man who didn't say much, used to say, a man's only as good as his word, Sam. Don't matter if you give it to a king or a stray dog. Damn it. I shut off the engine, grabbed my heavy maglite, the 4L one they call a trucker's friend, and got out of the cab. The air was still and cold. The crunch of my boots on the gravel sounded cannon loud in the silence. I didn't walk toward the side door. I walked toward the front of the bar, keeping to the shadows cast by the building itself, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt the old scar on my jaw throb, a phantom pain, a warning. I crept up to one of the grimy front windows, the one that wasn't covered by a beer sign, and peered inside. The scene was not what I expected. There was no shouting, no violence, no sign of a shakedown. The bar was almost empty. The two guys who owned the pickup trucks were at a table in the corner, nursing beers and watching a game on the TV, oblivious. At the bar, on his usual stool, was Carl. He was slumped forward, his head resting on his folded arms, either passed out or asleep. A casualty before the battle even started. And at a small table in the middle of the room, under the one good overhead light that didn't flicker, sat Lena. Across from her were two men in sharp, cheap suits. One was lean and wiry, with slick-back hair and a nervous energy, his eyes darting around the room. The other was bigger, with a shaved head and a neck as thick as a fence post. He sat perfectly still, radiating a kind of dense, patient menace. The sedan out front belonged to them. But they weren't threatening her. They were listening to her. Lena was the one talking. She was leaning forward, her hands flat on the table, her voice too low for me to hear the words, but the tone was firm, clear, commanding. I could see her face. This wasn't the fragile, scared woman from my truck. This was someone else. Someone in control. The man with the shaved head nodded slowly at something she said. The wiry one looked from her to the sleeping form of her husband at the bar, then back to her, a flicker of something, respect? Fear, in his eyes. My blood ran cold. This was all wrong. They were supposed to be Carl's problem. His sharks. But they were talking to Lena. And she was the one running the meeting. The man with the shaved head slid a piece of paper across the table. Lena picked it up, read it quickly, and gave a sharp, decisive nod. Then she looked up, and her eyes scanned the room, cool and appraising. For a terrifying second, I thought she'd seen me, a shadow in the window. Her gaze swept past me, unfocused, and she stood up. The two men stood up with her. She shook the big man's hand. Not like a victim, but like a business partner closing a deal. They walked toward the door. I ducked back into the deeper shadows by the corner of the building, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. The front door opened. I heard their voices, clearer now in the night air. And the driver is reliable, the wiry one asked, his voice thin and reedy. And I heard Lena's voice, clear and cold as ice, a voice I'd never heard before. He's perfect. Lonely. Predictable. Thinks he's a white knight. He's got some kind of guilty conscience about his brother, I think. He'll do whatever I ask. The three of them walked past my hiding spot, their shoes crunching on the gravel, and got into the sedan. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. He'll do whatever I ask. The words echoed in my head, each one a separate blow. Lonely. Predictable. White knight. She had me pegged. She hadn't been confiding in me. She'd been scouting me. She'd been vetting me for a job. Our quiet talks, her sad stories, her tears, it was all an audition. The way she'd looked at my cab, the questions about my routes, my schedule. It wasn't curiosity. It was reconnaissance. And I had just passed with flying colors. The kiss wasn't gratitude, it was a seal on a contract I hadn't known I was signing. The sedan's doors opened and closed. The engine started with a quiet purr, and it pulled smoothly out of the lot, heading east, back toward Vegas, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and the smoking ruins of my good intentions. I stood there in the dark, the heavy maglite feeling useless and stupid in my hand. The whole world had just tilted on its axis. The story I'd been telling myself for the last 48 hours, the one where I was the hero, the rescuer, the man atoning for his past sins, had just been ripped to shreds. I wasn't the hero. I was the patsy. I was the tool. The getaway driver, just like I'd feared, but for a crime I hadn't even understood. I waited a minute, my mind trying to catch up, to reassemble the pieces into this new, ugly picture. Then I walked back to my truck, my steps heavy, the gravel crunching like broken glass under my boots. I climbed back into the cab, the familiar smell of it now feeling alien, tainted. I sat in the driver's seat, the seat that had felt like a throne of solitude, and now felt like a fool's chair. The side door of the bar opened. Lena. She walked toward the truck, but her walk was different now. There was no hesitation, no fear. There was a purpose in her stride, a confidence. She didn't wait for me to open the door. She pulled it open herself and climbed in, shutting it firmly behind her. The cab was filled with her scent again, but this time it smelled like betrayal. She looked at me, and there was no trace of the vulnerable woman from 2 nights ago. Her eyes, usually soft as dusk, were now hard as polished stone. "They're gone," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "I saw," I said, my voice flat, dead. A flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked. "You were watching." I was. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look ashamed. She just nodded, accepting it as a new fact in the equation. "It's better this way. Less to explain." "Explain it anyway," I said, the anger starting to burn through the shock, a slow, hot fire. Explain the part about the lonely, predictable white knight. You can start there. She had the decency to flinch. Just a little, a tiny tightening around her mouth. It wasn't all a lie, Sam. I am trapped here. I do hate this life. I do want to leave. But the rest of it, I pushed, my voice tight. Carl's debt. The big bad loan sharks from Vegas who were going to hurt you. She sighed, a long, weary sound that for the first time sounded genuine, the sigh of someone tired of holding up a dozen lies at once. The debt is real. $50,000. But it's not Carl's. It's mine. And there it was. The first twist of the knife, pushed in slow. I'm the one who likes to play cards, she said, looking down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I'm the one who got in too deep. I met a guy, he was a professional poker player, traveled the circuits. He taught me the game, made it feel like art. I started going to private games in Flagstaff, then Vegas. I thought I was good. I wasn't. I was just fresh meat. Carl, he doesn't even know the half of it. He just knows we're broke. He thinks it's his drinking, his failure to manage the bar, that ruined us. I let him think it. It's easier. She looked over at the bar, at the slumped, oblivious figure of her husband. He was a good man, once. Before I met him. He had dreams. That fishing boat in San Diego, that was real. He was saving for it. Then he married me. And I broke him. I bled every cent and every bit of pride out of him to feed the tables in Vegas. He drinks to forget what a failure he is. He doesn't even know he's forgetting the wrong failures. The story was flipping, turning inside out like a glove. Carl wasn't the villain. He was the first victim. Lena wasn't the damsel in distress. She was the architect of the whole damn disaster. So what was all that? I asked, my voice tight with a rage that was starting to scare me. The tears? I have to leave him? What was the point of roping me into it? The point, she said, turning back to me, her eyes locking onto mine, cold and direct, is that they don't want money anymore. They know I can't get it. They've offered me a way to clear the slate. One job. I knew, with a sinking, sickening certainty, what was coming next. My empty trailer. My deadhead run to LA. My clean record. My life. They need something moved, she said, her voice dropping, confidential now, as if we were partners. Something that can't go through a regular shipping channel. Nothing that breathes, Sam. Just cargo. Boxes. They need a ghost load. A driver with no connection to them, on a route that makes sense, who won't ask questions because he thinks he's saving a woman he cares about. My truck. My home. My life. She wasn't asking for a ride to escape. She was asking me to be her accomplice. The whole romance, the shared secrets in the dark, the desperate kiss, it was all leverage. She had seen my loneliness like a vulnerability, a weakness in my armor, and she had sharpened it into a weapon to use against me. She had read my history, my guilt over my brother, and used it as a key to turn a lock she had built. You want me to haul a hot load to LA for your Vegas buddies, I said, the words tasting like acid. I need you to, she corrected me, her voice insistent. It's the only way. For me. For Carl. If I don't do this, they take the bar. And then they come for us. This way, it's clean. One trip. You drive. You drop the trailer at a warehouse in Vernon, you walk away, and you never see me again. The debt is gone. I get my life back. You get your life back by risking mine? I shot back, the anger finally boiling over, hot and clean. You think I've driven 2 million clean miles to get busted hauling God knows what for some Vegas scum? For you? What's in the boxes, Lena? Drugs? Guns? Money? You even know? I know I don't want to know, she said. And neither do you. She reached out, put her hand on my arm. The same touch that had felt like a spark of connection now felt like a brand. Sam, please. You said you'd help me. You promised. I promised to help a woman get away from a bad situation, I snarled. pulling my arm away. I didn't promise to help a liar commit a felony. You played me. You used my past against me. Her face hardened again. The mask was back in place. She saw it wasn't working. She was telling me what was going to happen. My truck, my home, was part of the price. My name wasn't on the bill, but I was expected to pay. You're making a mistake, Sam, she said, her voice cold. They don't like loose ends. They know about you now. They know your name. They know your truck. Refusing to help might be worse than helping. It was a threat. A plain and simple threat, wrapped in a thin veil of concern. She had led the wolves to my door and was now telling me my only option was to run with their pack. And you're a loose end I'm cutting right now, I said. I reached across her, my arm brushing hers, and I pushed the passenger door open, letting the cold night air rush in. I looked at her. Get out of my truck. For a second, a flash of the old Lena, the real Lena, or the Lena I wanted to believe in, came back. The scared, cornered woman. The mask had cracked. Underneath the cold manipulator was just a woman in a trap of her own making, trying to chew her own leg off to get free. Maybe some part of her story was true. Maybe she did want to escape. But she had tried to use me as the key, and in doing so, she had turned me into just another part of the lock. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of genuine fear. Not of me, but of what would happen now that her plan had failed. She looked at me for a long moment, her face a mixture of anger, disbelief, and a sliver of what might have been regret. Then, without another word, she slid out of the seat and stepped down onto the gravel. I slammed the door, the sound echoing in the silent lot. I hit the ignition, and the big Detroit diesel roared to life. I didn't look at her in the mirror. I didn't want to see her standing there, a ghost in the making. I just wanted her, and the whole damn sorry mess, to disappear behind me. I pulled out of the lot, the tires spitting gravel, and got back on the highway, heading west into the vast, empty darkness. The dash lights glowed. The engine hummed its steady song. The cab smelled the same. But it all felt different. Violated. The passenger seat felt colder than the air outside. I drove for an hour, then two, the anger slowly cooling into a familiar, heavy ache. The ache of loneliness. But it was a different kind now. Before, it was the simple loneliness of a man on his own. Now, it was the loneliness of a man who'd been shown a picture of a warm, firelit room, only to have the door slammed in his face and realize the room was never real to begin with. It was just a painting on a wall. I drove until the sun started to bleed over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of pink and orange. I thought about Clara again, the girl from Montana. She broke my heart by staying. Lena broke it by asking me to leave with her, but for all the wrong reasons. I wasn't sure which was worse. One was a tragedy of fear, the other a tragedy of deceit. I thought about Danny, and the guilt that had driven me to say yes to Lena. I had tried to pay an old debt and almost ended up paying with my life. Maybe the lesson wasn't that I should have saved him. Maybe the lesson was that you can't. You can't save people from themselves. All my life, I'd been trying to give people a ride out of their own messes, and all I'd ever done was get stuck in their traffic. Maybe the best I could do was just keep my own rig between the lines. Miles down the road, I pulled over onto the shoulder. The engine idled, a low rumble in the quiet of the morning. I reached up to the sun visor and pulled down the folded, worn square of paper. I unfolded it for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Clara's smiling face looked up at me, young and full of a hope that I knew had eventually faded. I looked at her for a long time, at the ghost of a choice I made, and a choice she made. Then I folded the picture back up, carefully, along the old creases, and tucked it back into the visor. It wasn't a shrine to a lost love anymore. It was just a reminder. A map of a road I once took. A road I now understood I was right to travel alone. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. The road ahead was empty. It was just me, the engine, and the 2 million miles behind me. Out here, you learn some lights are just there to show you how deep the darkness really is. And some roads, you gotta travel alone, even when you thought you had company.